The wind didn't exist on Xanthella in the way Eli Tran was used to. It was synthetic, piped and regulated by kilometer-wide climate stabilizers humming beneath the campus grounds, but it still tugged at the hem of his long military coat with the lazy defiance of nature. A strange, sour-sweet scent drifted in from the pollen towers, downwind something like citrus and ash. He pulled the collar tighter, fingers brushing a bump stitched under the fabric near his sternum. A medal, maybe two, still faintly scorched. The shuttle behind him hissed closed. With a quiet chime, it lifted into the golden haze of Xanthella's noon, leaving Eli alone on the arrival platform of the Interstellar Academy. He limped toward the main gates, his left leg stiff beneath layers of smart fabric support. Shrapnel wound from the breach on Kellen 4. Took 6 months just to get full range of motion back, another 8 before he could jog a full kilometer without locking up. These days, walking was fine. Running, not so much. But that wasn't in the job description anymore. Sergeant Eli Tran, retired. Earth Forces. History faculty, he murmured to himself as he approached the entrance scanner, saying it still felt strange. A panel blinked green and welcomed him with a melodic chime in standard. Then came a second voice lower, grainier. I was not informed we had guests from Earth military. The speaker stood to Eli's right, towering at least 3 heads taller, with layered armor plates the color of obsidian and rows of pale ocular nodules across its sloped head. Verlac, his co-instructor, a Xanthalan war scholar known across 3 sectors for strategic treatises that read more like eulogies. I'm not a guest, Eli replied, keeping his tone neutral. I'm your new colleague. There was a faint twitch in Verlac's stance. He didn't extend a limb in greeting. Human pedagogy tends toward the emotional, Verlac said flatly. Do try to stay factual. Cadets need discipline, not nostalgia. Eli gave a polite nod. Noted. They walked in silence past floating banners of cadet legions and alloy statues of long-dead tacticians. The classrooms were high-domed and sleek, walled with display fields that shimmered with tactical overlays and campaign maps. The one assigned to them had seating arranged amphitheater style around a central dais. The first lecture began at 3rd cycle. The auditorium filled slowly with cadets of all builds and sizes. Some slithered into place, others stalked. Several with wings folded them tight, talons drumming on reinforced seats. A few human exchange students sat in the back, eyes sharp, shoulders drawn. Eli adjusted the cuffs of his coat, then stepped back to let Verlac begin. Welcome, tacticians in training, Verlac's voice rang through the chamber, amplified but not dramatized. Today we begin with an examination of war outcomes across species histories. He paused just long enough to scan the room. Let us begin with a simple truth. Humans do not win wars, they only survive them. A ripple of chuckles echoed through the hall, some amused, others openly derisive. A Zurnari cadet whistled low through its spiracles. The human student stiffened. One glanced at Eli, uncertain. Eli didn't move. He crossed his arms, and as he did, a faint metallic clink followed the motion, barely audible over the buzz of murmurs. But Verlac's gaze flicked toward him. Eli said nothing. Some mammals, Verlac continued, with the faintest edge of theatrical disdain, mistake survival for victory. But survival is not triumph, it is retreat, it is entropy delayed. More laughter. A Clisari cadet raised a limb and said, Yet humans are still here, how do they delay entropy for so long? Redundancy, Verlac replied. They reproduce rapidly, adapt chaotically, and sacrifice limbs and lives like currency. Their wars are attrition contests. That is not strategy. Eli stepped forward then, slow and measured. His limp made the movement noticeable, but not pitiful. You want strategy? He said, voice calm but low. Let me tell you about Varda Station. The room hushed. Even Verlac blinked once. It was supposed to be a fuel depot, Eli began, walking slowly across the dais. Mid-orbit relay above Varda 6. Staffed with 57 personnel, half of them engineers. No heavy artillery, no backup. Just a few automated railguns and some ground defenses that hadn't been tested in decades. The screens behind him flared to life, grainy combat footage, mostly helmet cam. Barrage strikes across the horizon, smoke pouring from punctured metal towers. They came in force, 16 frigates, siegecraft, ground troops with thermals and shock bursters. We weren't soldiers, not most of us. A young cadet, Chivix, from the way his tendrils twitched, interrupted. Then why didn't you evacuate? Eli nodded slightly. Good question. No transports left. Supply route was already cut off. They hit the outer station before we could signal out. He paused. So we held. 47 days, no reinforcements. We rotated watches in 2-hour shifts to keep the railguns active. Reinforced the west hull with rebar and polymer mesh. Rigged the medbay nanites to stabilize bone breaks when we ran out of splints. Invented a new way to cycle oxygen, using coolant from the generator core when the scrubbers burned out. 8 protein gel packs and, eventually, recycled starch from our uniforms. The room had gone still. Even the insectoid cadets with no concept of facial expressions leaned forward. I took a blast to the left flank on day 30. Shrapnel lodged near the femoral artery, would have bled out in 4 minutes. One of the engineers used a heat coil and a surgical probe to cauterize the wound manually. No anesthetic, passed out twice. Took 14 months before I could walk again. Verloc shifted. And did your side win? We survived, Eli said. The siege broke when a stray micro-wormhole interfered with their orbital comms. Their fleet scattered. We signaled a Terran scout ship. 3 of us left standing. 34 casualties. He glanced around. Some wars aren't about winning, just living long enough to tell the story. The silence thickened. The holoscreens dimmed. One of the cadets whispered, barely audible, "That's not in the curriculum." Verlac stood, arms folded, plates shifting slightly. "Anecdotes do not rewrite military doctrine," he said. "The lesson was supposed to demonstrate." Eli took a step forward, unfastening his jacket. Each clasp undone made a soft click. He peeled it open, revealing the interior, a tapestry of metals stitched into the lining. Bronze, silver, dull black, and one shimmering white with a trident sigil. Gasps followed. The trident of Kelros. Even Verlac stilled. No alien had seen one in person, not until now. Eli didn't look triumphant. He looked tired. "Each of these," he said softly, "comes with a name, and a story, and a cost." Then he closed the jacket and stepped back. The class said nothing. Verlac didn't argue. The next morning arrived without ceremony. Xanthella's suns crept across the synthetic horizon with practiced precision, light refracted through programmed atmospheres to simulate the hazy gold of a temperate Earth morning. Eli didn't notice. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk in the instructor dormitory, one sock half pulled on, staring at a datapad flashing unread messages. Most were automated, one wasn't. Subject: Classroom Conduct. From Dr. Verlac. Message: Your account of Varda Station was unconventional. Recommend aligning future lectures with Academy strategic frameworks. The cadets are impressionable. Eli snorted softly and finished putting on his sock. His leg ached, a dull throb that worsened in the cold. He wrapped a support band around his knee and flexed it until the joint warmed. Then he stood, pulled on his coat carefully, and checked the inner lining to make sure the metals hadn't torn loose. They hadn't. He left for the faculty concourse without replying. The concourse smelled like sterilized ambition. Its high arches gleamed, lined with translucent screens rotating through galactic war maps, species doctrines, and bold quotes from long-dead strategists. Students filtered past him, heads down or whispering. He caught fragments of conversation words like trident, Varda, and human improvisation, but no one spoke to him directly. Not until he reached the nutrient dispensary. "Sergeant Tran?" Eli turned. A cadet stood at attention, awkwardly, like she wasn't sure if she should salute. She had short, bristly hair, the color of rust, and wore a polished insignia of the Zarsi Home Guard on her collar. "You were at Varda Station?" she asked. "The siege?" He nodded. "That's right." "I read the after-action reports," she said quickly, then hesitated. "Well, what little was declassified. I didn't know any of you survived." Most didn't. She looked like she wanted to ask more, but didn't. Instead, she just said, "Thank you," and turned away. Eli sat with a warm nutrient wrap and a lukewarm cup of synth coffee. Across the room, Verloc stood alone, analyzing a floating diagram of supply chain disruption during the Tarshak incursions. He hadn't acknowledged Eli's presence, but his head tilted slightly in his direction, once. By midday, their second joint lecture began. This time, Eli opened. "Yesterday," he said, standing in the center of the circular room, "we talked about surviving the unwinnable. Today, let's talk about something that isn't in your textbooks: adaptation under pressure." The screens around them flickered to life again, but not with battle footage. Instead, they displayed schematics: makeshift drones cobbled from scrap, laser wiring converted into proximity mines, even a deconstructed food replicator reprogrammed to manufacture breathable atmosphere canisters. "None of these were built in labs," Eli continued. "They were created in field hospitals, cargo bays, even storage closets, because when things fall apart, humans don't wait for permission to improvise." A cadet from the Kiru species raised his arm, shimmering scales catching the light. "But how does that help in victory? Improvisation doesn't replace planning." Eli nodded. "Planning gets you to the start of a battle. Improvisation gets you to the end." Murmurs rippled. The Kiru cadet frowned. Verloc, who had been silently watching from the side, finally spoke. "And how many of these improvised efforts end in failure? Your kind is infamous for dying in spectacularly preventable ways." Eli didn't bristle. He walked to the display and tapped a specific schematic, a communications device, built from 3 incompatible systems spliced together. "This one, made on day 39 of the Varda siege. We used it to bounce a signal off a passing asteroid's mineral field. That signal reached the Terran scout ship that saved us." Another murmur, this time less doubtful. "And how long did it take to build?" Verloc asked. 6 hours, Eli replied, by someone who had just lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Verloc's mandibles, no, scratch that. His faceplates tightened. Survival through suffering is not a sign of greatness. It is a failure of preparation. Eli looked at him. Sometimes, preparation means accepting that plans will fail. A silence settled between them. Then a different cadet spoke up. Rulo, a young Kalari with bioluminescent skin and a slight tremor in his voice. "Why didn't you surrender?" It wasn't mocking. It was genuine. Eli took a breath. "There was nothing to surrender to," he said. "No commanders to negotiate with, no guarantees of safety. We had injured too fragile to move, a comm system half fried, and enemy boarding parties that shot first and didn't ask questions." He paused. "And if we gave up, no one would have known. There would have been no report, no warning. The next station in that quadrant, fully staffed with 300, would have gone dark the same way." Verloc tilted his head. "So your resistance was not about victory. It was warning?" "Sometimes, living to warn the next outpost is the victory." The room didn't laugh this time. Even the more militant cadets, the ones bred for combat, who saw glory in conquests, looked uncomfortable. After class, Eli stayed back to power down the displays. Verloc remained seated, arms folded. "You were not what I expected," the alien finally said. "Likewise," Eli replied, glancing over his shoulder. Verloc looked toward the place where Eli had stood the day before. Jacket open, metals gleaming. "The trident," he said. "I believed it was myth." Eli didn't respond. "Among my people, we do not honor endurance. We honor precision, calculated outcomes. Survivors are considered contaminated by failure." Eli exhaled slowly. "Then I guess it's a miracle I got the job." "No, it explains why you were chosen." Eli turned, surprised. Verloc's voice dropped slightly. "Our students read theories. They memorize histories. But they do not understand entropy, collapse, what it takes to endure." "They will," Eli said quietly. "That's why I'm here." Verloc stood. "Then teach them." They parted without ceremony, but something had shifted. Not a truce, not yet, but the soil had cracked, and something had begun to grow. That night, Eli sat in his quarters with the jacket laid across his lap. He ran his fingers over the lining, tracing one metal in particular, a blackened one with melted edges. The Battle of Fenrose Pass. He'd lost a friend there, Henry. chest wound. Took too long to drag him to cover. Still dreamed about the blood sometimes. Still smelled it, even through fire and coolant vapor. He pressed his thumb against the metal, eyes closed. It was never about glory, just the stories left behind. 2 weeks passed. The shift was subtle at first. Cadets began lingering after lectures, asking Eli about specific campaigns. Not the ones in Verlac's syllabus, those were neat, organized, full of clear victories and easily categorized defeats, but the ones Eli carried in his limp and behind his eyes. Gray wars, dirty ones. Half recorded, mostly forgotten. Eli didn't embellish. He never had to. Most of the time, he didn't even stand when he taught anymore. He leaned against a desk, one leg slightly extended to ease the pressure. On bad days, he used a compact stool Verlac had, without comment, arranged by the holoboard. He taught quietly, honestly. The cadets, despite themselves, listened. Even the younger ones from the Bred for Battle worlds began scribbling notes. Not on strategies, but on things like rapid thermal patching, structural failure triage, and emergency blood stabilizers from food replicators. "You're teaching field improvisation," Verlac noted during one of their rare faculty lunchtimes, dissecting a pale green protein sphere with alarming efficiency. "I'm teaching what keeps them alive when the plan fails," Eli replied, biting into a bread substitute that tasted faintly of plastic and old lemons. They were sitting in the instructor lounge, alone but not tense, not anymore. "You're not wrong," Verlac said after a moment, "but your methods are disruptive." Eli smiled, not unkindly. "So's war." That afternoon, everything changed again. Midway through a lab simulation, Akiru Cadet Nazca misaligned a terrain model, triggering a cascade of hollow failures. A blast radius from a simulated impact overloaded the feedback grid. The flash wasn't dangerous, but bright enough to disorient. Nazca stumbled, slipped. There was a crack, a real one. She screamed. Eli was already moving. Limp or not, instinct took over. He dropped beside her, checked her limbs, ankle twisted hard inward, swelling, unnatural bend, definitely broken. He didn't touch it. "Someone get a Medassist drone," he said, calm but firm, "and isolate the grid. We don't want any more shocks." Rouleau sprinted to the wall panel. Verlac, eyes locked on the injury, stepped back. "I thought this was a non-contact module," he muttered, perhaps to himself. "It is," Eli said, "but students have bones." By the time the med drone arrived, Nazca was biting down on a stylus to keep from crying out. Her scales had gone pale. The drone scanned the ankle. Compound fracture, one bone displaced, no internal bleeding. "She needs a proper clinic," Eli told the hovering unit. "Pain suppression, splinting, realignment. Recovery time estimated 7 to 8 weeks, the drone reported flatly. Eli nodded. "Sounds about right." Verlac's gaze lingered. 8 weeks? For one broken limb? "That's if she's lucky and sticks to therapy," Eli replied. 2 weeks in a pressure cast, then gradual mobility. Verlac blinked slowly. "Our cadets are expected to return to training within 3. "Well," Eli said, standing stiffly, "your cadets weren't built with calcium and protein. Ours were." He paused, then added, "You want to teach strategy, you need to understand the material you're working with. Which is fragile. Which is human." Later that evening, Verlac requested a private conversation. They met on the Academy's skywalk, an open-air corridor that stretched between 2 towers, the floor made of transparent polymer. Below them, lights from dormitories and training fields shimmered in the evening haze. "You mock doctrine," Verlac began, his voice low. "I challenge doctrine," Eli corrected. "Big difference." Verlac faced him fully. "And what does your doctrine say about teaching the vulnerable to survive in wars they cannot win?" Eli considered his answer. "We don't teach them to win," he said. "We teach them how not to lose everything." Verlac exhaled, a sound like steam escaping. "In my species," he said, "when cadets break a limb, they are temporarily decommissioned. They are considered structurally compromised." "That's not how humans work," Eli said. "We break, then we heal. And while we heal, we learn how not to break that way again." Silence settled. Below them, a squad of cadets jogged in formation, their footfalls echoing faintly through the wind. Verlac spoke again, softer this time. My brother died in a war he should not have been sent to. He followed doctrine, calculated to the last probability. Eli didn't say anything. His unit was ambushed, no fallback plan, no improvisation. Eli waited. They all died, 12 of them, perfect soldiers. And still, Eli said gently, they died. Verlac looked at him. Perhaps some chaos is necessary. The next day, Eli entered the lecture hall early. He found something unexpected waiting for him. A diagram. Printed, not digital. Hand-drawn lines showed overlapping fallback positions, rerouted comm nodes, and irregular supply caches. It was messy, improvised, brilliant. A note on top. What if chaos can be structured, Rouleau? Eli smiled and slipped the paper into his coat. That afternoon, Verlac introduced the lecture. Today, he said, we examine the doctrine of strategic unpredictability, as exemplified by the human experience. Eli took his seat. The class leaned forward. Xanthellin Interstellar Academy marked its annual wargame simulation trials with what passed on that world, for fanfare, intermittent chimes, polite announcements, and banners that shimmered with rotating symbols of every allied species. But the cadets were less restrained. Every hallway buzzed. Across the domes, field drills turned intense, whispers of team rankings floated above lunch tables, and friendships frayed into rivalries. This year, for the first time, human-designed field tactics were allowed into the simulation pool, not as a dominant doctrine, just a wild-card inclusion, something experimental. Verlac hadn't resisted. Eli hadn't suggested it. It had been Rouleau's idea. The cadets' final proposal, structured chaos, reactive doctrine under resource constraint, had made it through the faculty review by one vote. Now, on the final day of trials, Rouleau stood in front of a classmate squad, drawn from 4 species. He wore a modified vest salvage pouches, strapped across his back, and sported hand-drawn schematics stitched to his sleeves. The exercise would pit his squad against a superior force in a simulated breach scenario with limited tools, time, and information. Eli watched from the instructor gallery above, arms folded, leg braced on a low bench. He hadn't slept well, the ache in his hip had been creeping for days, and the weight of his coat didn't help. But he was here, watching, waiting. Beside him, Verlac stood stiff as ever, but his arms were not crossed. His fingers rested against the railing, still, observing. The simulation launched. Rouleau's squad didn't fortify their position. Instead, they scattered. Confused chatter broke out in the other galleries. Verlac leaned forward, but Eli didn't blink. He recognized the pattern. Flash jammers on high ledges, vapor bombs made from coolant siphons, 3 decoy thermal signatures leading the enemy down false corridors. Chaos. Controlled. Then came the fallback maneuver, a circular ambush ring, not textbook, but effective. One member simulated an injury and activated a false medical alert, drawing the opposing team into a kill zone. It was the same tactic Eli's team had used at Malcor Ridge, where they dragged a wounded private through 2 kilometers of fire to buy a 30-second window. The enemy squad fell apart within 4 minutes. Simulation ended. The lights dimmed. Eli exhaled. The crowd was silent for 3 full seconds, then erupted into scattered applause. Rouleau stood in the center, panting. One of his simulated arms was disabled, and he was covered in virtual soot. His squad looked exhausted, but they were standing, and they had won. That evening, the instructor lounge was unusually quiet. Eli sat at his usual table, sipping hot broth from a ceramic mug one of the human exchange students had given him. It was patterned like earth soil, pitted and warm. He didn't look up when Verlac approached. "You should be pleased," Verlac said. "I'm satisfied," Eli replied, setting the mug down. He broke protocol 3 times, ignored supply standardizations. He won. Yes, he won. A long pause. "I have begun rewriting my curriculum," Verlac said, "incorporating contingency principles." Eli raised an eyebrow. "They will still learn doctrine," Verlac continued, but also the nature of unpredictability, its function, not just its risk. Eli smiled. Careful. That sounds like adaptation. It is, Verloc said. And survival. They stood together at the window overlooking the western quad. Below, cadets celebrated. The ones who lost were still talking, laughing, comparing notes. Then came a voice. Excuse me, Sergeant Tran? It was Nazca, the Kiru cadet who'd broken her ankle 2 weeks prior. She stood carefully, still using a mobility brace. She bowed slightly, a gesture common among her people. I wanted to say, thank you, she said, for staying calm, for making sure I got proper treatment. Eli nodded. How's the ankle? 2 more weeks and I can phase out the brace, she said. Rehab's working. They say I'll be back to full function. That's good, he said. Just don't rush it. She smiled, then hesitated. Before the accident, I thought humans were weak, soft-bodied, too slow. Not entirely wrong, Eli said. But now I think, maybe you're not fast or strong, you just don't stop. Eli's smile deepened. That's closer. She nodded again, turned, and left. After she disappeared down the corridor, Verloc murmured, You're changing them. No, Eli replied. They're changing themselves. I'm just holding the line. He tapped the inside of his coat. His fingers brushed metals. One by one, he remembered the weight behind each. The trident of Kelros, the scorched campaign bar from Kellen 4, the rust-stained badge from Varda Station. Not decoration evidence. Evidence of pain, ingenuity, loss, and relentless, stubborn survival. The next morning, Eli entered the lecture hall early. He walked slowly, hips stiff, but upright. His coat shifted as he moved, metals whispering beneath the fabric. A few students turned as he entered. This time, no one laughed. No one whispered. They watched. He reached the dais, looked at them, really looked. Today, he began, we're not starting with a theory. He opened his coat. This time, he didn't do it slowly. No theatrics, just purpose. He let them see it all, metals, patches, even the singed edges of a life worn into the fabric. This, he said, isn't proof of victory. It's a record of what it costs to stay in the fight. He paused. We don't win because we're smarter, or faster, or better. We win because when everything collapses, we don't. He looked out across the room. Even Verloc sat among the students this time. We hold the line. Silence. And then, in a slow ripple, cadets rose to their feet. Not a salute, not a cheer. Just quiet respect. Eli nodded once, closed his coat, and turned to begin the lecture. The war was over. But the teaching had just begun.